It's a great pleasure to be here today, and I thank everyone for welcoming me and taking time to listen to my comments. About 4 years ago, I had the privilege to meet with President Grimson. He was introduced to me by Alice Rogoff, who was sitting here with him. And I became much more familiar with what was going on in the Arctic. During the course of the ensuing years, as I looked at more and more investment opportunities in the Arctic, I was actually contacted by the World Economic Forum to explore how to increase the amount of capital available to invest in projects throughout the Arctic. As a result of this work, we have advanced a three-step program which involves building a pathway for responsible and sustainable development in the Arctic. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. In order to benefit from the immense economic opportunities, the citizens of the world have a responsibility to become wise stewards of its sustainable development. The Arctic, as you can see, has many opportunities, virtually limitless. While we often think of energy, extraction and mining, shipping, as we've heard, is an important component, and especially as the retreating sea ice enables more and more passage through the Arctic gateways, there will be more and more need for infrastructure development in the Arctic. There are other things like ocean resources, fisheries, biomarine technology, things which people do not readily think of as being Arctic in nature, but yet is one of the most important food sources for the world. And then environmental protection. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world and has profound effects and impacts on the rest of the world. I had the opportunity to speak with the CEO of the World Wildlife Fund, who described to me the Arctic as a giant bank shot. And for those who aren't familiar with that phrase, if you play billiards or pool, you will know that from time to time you will shoot the ball at the side of the table and then it will come back and hit another ball. The Arctic is feeling the effects of all the global changes which are occurring outside of the Arctic, which is impacting it environmentally and very dramatically. And as a result of that, what is happening in the Arctic is coming back at the rest of the world. For instance, if Arctic warming were to continue to the point that we melted all of the glaciers in Greenland, then we would have seawater around the world rise by at least 6 feet. So the consequences are very profound of what's going on there, and certainly in a place like Singapore, a very important place to be focused. In the opportunity I've had to work with the World Economic Forum, I was asked to join the Global Agenda Council on the Arctic, and one of my co-members is here today, Meade Treadwell, the former Lieutenant Governor of Alaska. And it is reasonable to expect that a purely governmental solution is not possible to the needs of the Arctic. So I'd like to tell you today more about a private sector initiative. You can see here that the World Economic Forum has gathered a large and diverse group of organizations together on a solution for Arctic development needs. And as you scan the list, you can see names of all sorts of organizations from around the world where we have delegates who are attending the Global Agenda Council on the Arctic. The approach that we are going to outline will be in 3 steps. The first step is the introduction of the Arctic Investment Protocol. It would be unreasonable to rush into development without making sure that there are certain responsible and accountable standards for development within the Arctic. This code of conduct is responsible to help ensure private sector organizations do the right things for the right reasons. It is intended to be measurable as a series of goals against which companies may be evaluated. It is intended to hold companies accountable to a pragmatic set of standards and to assure that reasonable development occurs. So in order to establish this protocol, we have established 3 objectives which the protocol will address. The first is to build resilient societies through economic development. The goal here is to create enduring jobs and promote capacity building and encourage local ownership of assets in the Arctic. It is also to promote the UN Sustainable Development Goals and to create better living standards through infrastructure investment. And as you can see by the slide, there is a very strong correlation between the quality and standard of living in any region of the world based upon how much infrastructure is in place. 2, it is designed to respect and collaborate with indigenous and local communities. The Arctic people must be engaged in an inclusive dialogue on the practical standards for economic growth. Development should not be imposed by those from afar. Through active collaboration, we can work to reduce the economic disparities that we see in so many Arctic regions. Objective 3, protect and preserve the complex and diverse environment of the Arctic. The Arctic environment is changing rapidly. As such, investment without environmental concern will not succeed. We must not follow the historical patterns of development which have left deep and lasting scars on local ecology. Objective 4, a commitment to responsible and accountable business practices. It goes without saying that all business must be conducted in a fair, legal, and transparent manner, but it should go beyond this. And the protocol is designed to raise minimum standards and to set a higher bar for economic development in the Arctic. The Arctic Investment Protocol is built upon sound principles, which include the International Finance Corporation Performance Standards on environmental and social sustainability, the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, and the World Bank's Environmental Health and Safety Guidelines. Objective 5, to consult and integrate science with traditional ecological knowledge. Modern science can help us understand the future of the Arctic region. Additionally, traditional knowledge provides us an understanding of the past and how man has interacted in the Arctic environment. We need to rely on science and traditional knowledge to navigate the rapidly changing environment. It is bad business to do otherwise. Objective 6, global cooperation and best practices. The parties that you see here are all individual companies or nations with which we have had discussions, and it should not be assumed that they are endorsing the protocol, but they are engaged in discussion around the protocol. The scale of both the opportunities and the challenges here are enormous. Only with a large and diverse group of stakeholders can we hope to set a higher bar for the Arctic region. Step 2. The Arctic Infrastructure Inventory. The second step sounds much less lofty than the first, but it is an extremely important and practical step for us to advance economic development in the Arctic. Under the Arctic Infrastructure Inventory, we will develop an authoritative and exhaustive database of infrastructure for needs in the Arctic. At present, there is no one compendium of what needs to be built or created in the Arctic. The goal here is to collect investment opportunities and to make them available on an open source database, which will allow private sector and public sector investors to access a list of opportunities in which they may seek to invest. Opportunities which just exist today, and I often hear statements from people They say, well, Scott, the changing environment of the Arctic is certainly going to have big consequences over the next 30 to 50 years, but what is there to do today? Well, for instance, as you have heard already, there's the Bremen Ports project in Iceland. There's also, at a much lower level, a floating port in Norway. The Arctic Railway is a project that is currently being reviewed to build a railway through Finland to Kirkenes, which is the port in the most northern port in Norway. The Lava Express. The Lava Express is a project which is designed to build a light rail service from the Reykjavik airport to the center of the city, as tourism in Iceland continues to expand dramatically by 30% per year. The Alaska LNG project. This is a huge project. It is proposed to be require an infrastructure investment of $45 to $65 billion. There will be many other projects around this. So being aware of what's going on with the LNG project, whether there be private investment or not, is an important opportunity for investors in the Arctic. The Susitna Watana hydroelectric project. This project is here and now and very real. And we are currently looking at making an investment in this project as part of Guggenheim's current investor groups. The HS Orca project. This is a geothermal power plant located in Iceland. The project has a strategic location as a highly efficient operating facility with off-take agreements through 2026. Silicor Materials. This is a company which basically provides silicon material for the use in solar panels. It is amazing to believe that people who are sitting in Singapore might look at the Arctic and realize that it is an important piece of the supply chain in terms of solar energy. Other opportunities in the Arctic, in science and innovation, bio prospecting, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, food, biofuel, aquaculture, cold tech, data centers, cold climate testing, construction and building materials, renewable energy, geothermal, wind, hydro, solar, tidal, space and monitoring, satellite technologies, unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned underwater vehicles. When I traveled through the Arctic, I have seen many opportunities. Most people would assume that the things that I see are things like port projects or mines or energy extraction. But some of the most interesting projects that I've seen relate to the biosciences. At the University of Tromsø in Norway, they have isolated a molecule from an algae which only grows in the Arctic, which can be used in the treatment of cancer. So when we think about the Arctic, we must rethink our perceptions. As I jokingly say, I recently had an American who said, "Oh, so you're going to the Arctic again?" I said, "Yes." They said, "So when you've been there, have you seen the polar bears and the penguins?" And my response was, "Well, there are no penguins in the Arctic." And their response was, "Oh, you mean they're extinct already?" There is a great mythology around the Arctic. And the misunderstandings about the Arctic as just a place to go and extract natural resources is very misleading. And so that is one of the reasons that we are putting so much energy and effort into the development of the Arctic investment inventory. The third step is to provide for the necessary financing resources to implement the projects and programs for sound and responsible development in the Arctic. That is the Arctic Permanent Investment Vehicle. We have had early discussions with major investors throughout the world to finance a permanent investment vehicle which can be used for the purpose of financing projects throughout the Arctic. Our goal will be to create a new vehicle which can provide funds for projects and initiatives that will positively impact Arctic economic development. As you can see here, the amount of capital and leverage using a very simple model that is commonly used by development banks around the world would provide significant capital for Arctic development. If you remember on the infrastructure slide that we looked at a minute ago, our best estimate today, and it is very difficult to get a good estimate, but our best estimate is that there is $1 trillion of infrastructure and investment to be done in the Arctic. That estimate, by all calculations, is probably too low. When you look at the Arctic, let me help you put it in perspective. It is now possible, because of the retreating sea ice, for ships to pass through the northeast and northwest passages 4 months of the year. It is estimated that within 10 years, it is likely that those passages will be open all year long. To give you a scale of the impact of how big this is for global shipping, a ship going from Korea through the Panama Canal to the port of Newark in New York City travels 13,000 kilometers. If that same ship were to use the Northwest Passage, there would be 5,000 kilometers. It would reduce the shipping distance by more than half. At the rate of the receding sea ice in the polar region, there will be no ice on the North Pole by the year 2050. The risk to the estimates so far have been that all the calculations which science has made is that the rate of change is actually faster than the projections. It is actually happening at a rate of almost 200% faster than is currently projected. So even if we had stood here 5 years ago and talked about the future, the world we would have thought 5 years away has turned out to be an optimistic view. Things are changing quickly. I recently had the privilege to have dinner with Alice Rogoff and President Obama. And President Obama, I think, keenly had a great insight, which I agree with. And that is that we as humans take great pride in our ability to innovate around change. However, there is a chance here that change is happening so much faster than we think that we may not innovate quickly enough. That is why it is important that we now put in place a way for us to make investment in the Arctic. During a visit to the Hoover Institution a year or so ago, where I was asked invited to discuss the Arctic along with my colleague, Meade Treadwell, I had the opportunity to speak with the former U.S. Secretary of State, George Shultz. He was Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan. Secretary Shultz said to me, "Scott, can you imagine that you got up this morning and you picked up your newspaper and the headline on the top of it said, 'The world has discovered a new ocean.'" Indeed, the world has discovered a new ocean. In the words of Secretary Shultz, this is the most significant event in the history of the world in 12,000 years, when the Ice Age first began to end. So the Arctic, for us, represents a huge challenge and a huge opportunity. But to sum it up most accurately, from an investment standpoint, the Arctic region is the fastest growing economic region of the world. When you look at any other region in the world, whether it be Africa or other places which are noted for their rapid growth, the average economic annual rate of growth in the Arctic region is the highest in the world relative to any country or any continent. So for investors, there is an opportunity here to take advantage of the impact of climate change, but there is probably more importantly a responsibility. And that is why we are focused on the Arctic Investment Protocol, which we plan to announce in Davos in January. That protocol calls us to behave responsibly and to do that which is in the best interest of all the stakeholders of the Arctic. And the Arctic belongs to all of us. There are 6 million people who live in the Arctic. However, the impact of what is going on there will affect us all. In that way, the Arctic, it belongs to all of us. And we must all take this opportunity to begin to take responsibility to make sure that the events in the Arctic are dealt with in a responsible way for all of mankind. Thank you very much.